and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky delivers impassioned plea for bipartisan support in a speech to the U.S. Congress. Russia's President Vladimir Putin absolves Russia of blame in its conflict with Ukraine. And European Union buildings switch lights off in solidarity with Ukraine. We begin in Washington, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had touched down in the United States overnight, and he has also addressed the Congress. He told the United States Congress that the tens of billions of dollars of aid it had approved to help it fight a Russian invasion was not charity, but an investment in global security. In his first visit out of his country since the war began in February, Mr. Zelensky told U.S. lawmakers in the House of Representatives chamber that he hoped they would continue to support Ukraine on a bipartisan basis, a major point as Republicans are due to take the majority in the House of Representatives on January the 3rd.
Thank you for both financial packages you have already provided us with and the ones you may be willing to decide on. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way. I'm glad to stress that President Biden supported our peace initiative today. Each of you, ladies and gentlemen, can assist in the implementation to ensure that America's leadership remains solid, bicameral, and bipartisan. Thank you. It's a great honor for me to be at the U.S. Congress and speak to you and all Americans. Against all odds and doom and gloom scenarios, Ukraine didn't fall. Ukraine is alive and kicking. We defeated Russia in the battle for minds of the world. We have no fear, nor should anyone in the world have it. Ukraine's gained this victory, and it gives us courage, which inspires the entire world.
And U.S. President Joe Biden says he is, quote, not at all worried about holding together an international coalition supporting Ukraine. Mr. Biden says he has never seen the NATO alliance or the European Union more united. He was speaking at a press briefing held together with the visiting Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, in Washington.
I see no sign of there being any change. We all know what's at stake here. Our European partners all the more so. They fully understand it. So I don't see any reason to believe there'll be any lessening of support. And as we reach out to our NATO allies, our Secretary of Defense and our Secretary of State, we get continued support, not only there, but also from around the world, from Japan and many other countries as well. So I feel very good about the solidarity of support for Ukraine.
Earlier, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Ukrainian president had met ahead of his address to the U.S. Congress. Ms. Pelosi hails the courage and resilience of the people of Ukraine.
It is a profound privilege and with great pride that I welcome President Zelensky to the capital of the United States. Here we are today to welcome the brave, courageous President Zelensky in order to praise not only him, but the courageous, unified people of Ukraine for what they are doing to protect democracy. Over the last 10 months since the invasion, you, Mr. President, and the Ukrainian people have met Putin's brutality with a strong will. Your visit comes as the Congress prepares to again pass another consequential round of security, economic, and humanitarian assistance. Within the next 48 hours, hopefully this will be done. And I want to applaud President Biden's plans to deliver Patriot air defense system, additional HIMARS, and other vital military equipment.
And I want to give all the messages I prepared in your language with all respect to your country for that support that you've done for Ukraine in our battle, really battle for our freedom, democracy, as Speaker Pelosi said, but for our houses, families, for our great children, the same great as you have, of course. And for me, again, honest that I'm here. I'm the second time here, but the first time was before the war, right, before full-scale invasion by Russians, and, you know, what can I say, different feeling, like different history, like different life. But anyway, in this life is very important that Congress of the United States is a big friend of Ukrainian people, really, of freedom of Ukrainians. And thank you so much that you supported us in financial support and with really that ammunition which will help on battlefield. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great honor.
And while President Zelensky was in Washington, the lights went off in European Union buildings in Brussels to show solidarity with Ukraine as its population experiences widespread power cuts from Russian airstrikes. In a video message, the president of Ukraine had said his people were suffering as a result of constant power outages and called on Ukraine's partners to find new ways to help his country.
When the lights shuts off, you always take it as something out of ordinary. But when you spend 4, 10, 20 hours or even days without it, and you start to get used to the darkness, that's the worst thing ever. This means that light is not the only thing they want to take away from you. They aim for everything that is part of your life. This is how we live in Ukraine right now, defending ourselves from the enemy who came to destroy us. That is why I am turning to you now. True friends of Ukraine, we need your support. Every doctor who is forced to operate in the dark, every father and every mother who does everything to give their families what they need, even in the darkness, every Ukrainian who has faith in the freedom despite the darkness. Together we will stop this war.
Let's talk now to Henrik Larsson, Senior Researcher, Center for Security Studies at Zurich in Switzerland. Good morning to you, Mr. Larsson. Thank you for your time. This is a public relations coup for Mr. Zelensky. I mean, leaving Ukraine gives the impression of confidence that his country will not fall apart in his absence. And secondly, he's visiting the biggest reason why Ukraine is still standing outside of its people, and that's the United States. What do you make of his visit? It happened while most of us on this side of the world were sleeping, and the details were sketchy at first. And a lot of things happened within a very short space of time. He went to see President Biden. They had meetings with security officials. He addressed the joint session of the Congress and all of that. What do you make of his visit?
Well, I think the main purpose of that visit was to create political momentum. We know that the Republicans will soon take over the House in the United States. So the Democrats are, of course, most supportive of Ukraine. Now Zelensky has visited the United States with a big PR campaign. That means it would be difficult for the Republicans, once they assume the majority in the House, to slow or break the support that the United States has given so far. So it's a PR campaign to build up the political domestic pressure in the United States for the Republican not to falter on the promises that the Democrats have given Ukraine.
The other part of this, of course, is that when you're talking to somebody over a Zoom call or virtually, or you're watching the person on television, is a different experience from when you see the person in person, when you're actually standing in front of the person. And as Mr. Zelensky referenced there, his last visit to the United States was shrouded by controversy. That was under former President Donald Trump. But this one is a bit different. As you said, it has political momentum. But he's also going to return to Ukraine with significantly more than he would have had the visit not taken place, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's 1.8 billion extra, which is it's not overwhelmingly more than what Ukraine has already received from the United States and other donors. So I wouldn't say that in terms of finances and military support, he didn't get so much with him from Washington. And then commentators and others talk about that Ukraine has gotten these Patriot missile defense systems, but they only got only one of these Patriot batteries. So I will not say that Ukraine has gotten so much out of this, but it's more a PR campaign to maintain the political momentum into the next year, as I mentioned earlier.
You did mention about this Patriot missile defense system. It's easily the most advanced missile defense system in the world. The United States is quite wary of giving it out. I believe the only other country that has had this Patriot missile defense system handed to it is Israel. So even giving one to Ukraine is a big step, considering that earlier on in the conflict, they didn't want to do so. And of course, Ukraine has suffered as a result of not having a shield against Russian missiles. So even though it's one, some of the reports I've read this morning indicate that it's one, but that there may be others that will follow.
Yeah, I mean, the United States, of course, worried that this would cause escalation with Russia, that Russia would want to escalate the war to retaliate for the increased weapons support to Ukraine. So the war has been characterized since February this year, when the war started, by a cautious, prudent approach from the Western powers in the support that they have given to Ukraine. So they have been gradually escalating to see what would be the reaction on the Russian side. So you're absolutely right. I think this is the first Patriot battery that Ukraine will get, and let's see how now, if there will be a Russian reaction and what it will be. I think more will come, definitely, as you say.
Do you think his plea in the U.S. Congress in that speech would sway the Republicans who are taking over the chamber on the 3rd of January in any way? We all know how polarized the United States is in politics, but you know, especially now ahead of the 2024 elections. Do you think he's going to make any kind of impact? I mean, being physically present there and with that speech.
I mean, it gives a different impression when a person shows up. It's not via Zoom, and he talks directly to Congress and to the American people from the Congress. It, of course, does make a big difference. Well, I mean, President Zelensky is a president in a country of war, and it's very difficult for him to leave the country, because that might be perceived as abandoning his country. And then there is the security element too. It was leaked before he left that probably he was planning a trip to the United States. So there are both the security concern and this abandonment of Ukraine, of his country, concerned by going to the United States. But as I said, it has proven an immense PR victory for him. I think he has built the momentum he wanted. The visit had gone well.
You've answered my next question, which was that was it worth it? But the visuals we're seeing on the screen now are being beamed back to his people in Ukraine would tend to indicate that it was a worthwhile trip for him. The other part of this, of course, is that President Biden indicated that he had no worries about the EU solidarity, the solidarity of the European Union and NATO in its continuing support for Ukraine. Even going into next year, 2023. Do you think he was being overtly optimistic there? We all know that you know, there are strains within the alliance already and within the EU.
I don't think he's being over-optimistic. Well, there was one country which is called, Hungary, which is the country mostly against the sanctions and mostly against weapon deliveries to Ukraine. And they have been withholding an aid package of 18 billion for the next year that Ukraine desperately needs to keep its finances afloat during war. But even in that case, it was possible to work around the country. I mean, Hungary is, after all, a small nation, and it's the amount of pressure that the bigger countries could exert on Hungary was sufficient to make it bend.
While President Zelensky was in the United States, the Russian president was quoted as saying that the battlefield losses in Ukraine were a common tragedy, and that the war in Ukraine, or as he called it, the special military operation, was a joint problem, or was a joint tragedy for both sides. That seems to have been swamped in all the shall we say, news about President Zelensky's visit. Not too much traction on that.
Yeah, I haven't seen that myself, actually. It's the first time I hear that you mentioned it now. Yeah, I mean, it's a common tragedy. Well, Russia tries to make this a war of tragedy, that the Ukraine and Russia are basically one nation. I think if one thing the war has shown is that they are definitely not one nation, and Russia's atrocities against Ukrainians make that an impossible task. They would be perceived as, Russia will be perceived as Ukraine's enemy for decades to come.
Now, there is, of course, the more troubling part of this. While President Zelensky was either on his way or in Washington, Russia had proposed a 30% increase in the size of its armed forces. It's also going to increase investment in artificial intelligence, missile technology, and all of that. All this, of course, was announced by the president himself while he was going around new weaponry for the Russian army. He was being shown new weaponry for the Russian army. So in spite of what we're seeing in terms of the resolve from the West, the Russians are not backing down either, so we're still in for a protracted conflict, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm afraid so, unfortunately. The Putin regime is obsessed with Ukraine and this idea that Ukraine and Russia are one nation, and that Ukraine basically belongs to Russia, unfortunately. I don't see the ambition. No one is seeming to back down on either side, so you're absolutely right. We're in for a protracted effort. The question is whether Russia financially can bear these extra military costs. I mean, now they are rearming toward the border with Finland, which is likely to become a NATO member. And, well, one thing is the money, but if you do not have soldiers that are motivated to fight in Ukraine because they don't believe in the war, you do have a problem. I doubt these military investments would make a great difference on the battlefield. Russia might get some tactical victories out of it, but in strategic terms, I doubt the investment will pay off.
Let's before I let you go, let me ask you about a couple of other conflicts that seem to be, you know, slipping by in terms of world attention while all of this is happening with reference to Ukraine and the West and Russia. In the case of the Chinese themselves are also making massive investments. By some accounts, they already have the world's largest army at this point, and they're working very hard on their navy. And then, of course, you have the North Koreans who are promising that in the coming days, they are going to send an intercontinental ballistic missile on a normal trajectory, which, as some of the analysts propose, could show that that kind of missile could reach continental United States. That would really alarm Japan and South Korea, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it has already alarmed Japan, which is bound to increase its defense expenditure by up to, it would spend 2% of its defense of its GDP on defense, as opposed to only 1% before. So you can say that the geopolitical tension is increasing also in Asia.
Given that,
yeah.
Do you think that we're going to end up with too many things to look at, and then at the end there's the risk that maybe it's not where our eyes are that what is going to be a potential problem will emerge from?
Yeah, it's a very good question that you ask, because for the United States, the pure competitor is not Russia. Russia is wreaking havoc in Ukraine, and as such is challenging the international order that the United States underwrites. But the pure competitor from the perspective of Washington is China, which is immensely powerful, much more powerful than Russia, and probably will try at some point to establish its own little regional hegemony in Asia, beginning with taking back Taiwan. So you're absolutely right about that. But nothing indicates that China has such plans within the coming years. It might be within this decade, but maybe not in the next 1-2 years. So for now, it allows the United States to focus on Ukraine.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Eric Larson, for your perspective, and compliments of the season. Do have yourselves a good Christmas over there in Switzerland.
Christmas.
And after the break, we'll bring you details of that proposed 30% increase in the size of the Russian armed forces. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that battlefield losses in Ukraine were a, quote, common tragedy, and that he continued to see the Ukrainian people as a brotherly nation, despite what he calls Moscow's special military operation. Mr. Putin said Russia's enemies wanted to see Russia disintegrate, and repeated an assertion that Russia was forced to launch military action in Ukraine due to what he called Western provocations, an idea Kiev and the West has dismissed as false. Russian leaders have also said that Russia could achieve the goals of the special military operation in Ukraine without damaging the economy by militarizing it.
Priority task for the year 2023 is to continue with the special military operation until the tasks are completed. Gradually increase the age of conscription of citizens from 18 to 21 years old, raise the age limit to 30 years, provide the opportunity at the request of citizens to enlist in military service under a contract or be drafted from the first day of joining the service, continue to improve the conditions, structure, and types of the military forces, increase the responsibility of the main commanders for the preparation and deployment of formations and units, form 3 motorized rifle divisions of combined armed formations in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia region.
Численность вооруженных сил до 1,5 миллиона.
Meanwhile, the Russian president has been given a guided tour around a display of new weaponry for the Russian army. Mr. Putin was shown around by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. The footage provided by the Russian Poll shows Mr. Putin looking at drones, armored SUVs, and night vision equipment. The exhibition was held at the Russian Defense Ministry headquarters in Moscow. And still staying with Russia, the president there has given his backing to a plan to boost the size of the armed forces by more than 30%. As he says, Moscow needed to learn from and fix the problems it had suffered in Ukraine. At an end-of-year conference of Russia's top military brass, the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, proposed beefing up the armed forces to 1.5 million combat personnel from 1.15. That's an addition of 350,000 troops. General Shoigu also proposed raising the age range for mandatory Russian military service to cover Russian citizens aged 21 to 30. And staying with the Russian military, the defense minister, Mr. Shoigu, has also said that the Ukrainian ports of Berdyansk and Mariupol, located on the Sea of Azov in territory occupied by Russian forces, were functional. Speaking at the meeting of the Russian Defense Ministry Board, the president, rather with President Vladimir Putin listening, Mr. Shoigu also admitted to the problems faced when the partial mobilization in Russia was announced. He said, quote, to stabilize the situation, protect new territories, and prepare a new advance, we needed to expand the number of our troops. In order to achieve it, we called for partial mobilization. It became a marker of maturity for Russian society and a serious test for the country and the armed forces. And new series of satellite images show Russia has continued to expand its military bases in the Arctic region in spite of significant losses in its war on Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says there's now a significant Russian military buildup in the high north, with recent tensions causing the alliance to double its presence in response. However, a senior Western intelligence official also says Russia has withdrawn as much as 3/4 of its land forces from the high north region near the Arctic, sending them to bolster its faltering invasion of Ukraine. The satellite pictures show a series of Russian radar bases and runways undergoing improvements over the past year. Let's talk now to Major General Henry Ayola, military strategist and former commander of Nigeria's Operation Safe Haven. He joins us virtually. Good morning to you, General. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Ladi. Thanks for the opportunity once again.
Let me start off from the Russian angle before we go back to President Zelensky and his visit to the U.S. What do you make of the various moves by the Russians? We're seeing display of new weaponry. We're being told of plans to increase the size of the armed forces. Russia is expanding its presence in the Arctic region, surrounding some of the conflict areas. And it seems that given the winter, it's holding on to territory. What do you make of all of this put together?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, if we take cognizance of the background, I remember when it was just the first 1 month in March, that the operation, then they were calling it special military operation. You know, we were trying to establish what could be the strategic end state of Russia. And as the war has progressed to where we are now, you will see that it's becoming increasingly clear that the strategic end state of Russia could be summarized as just simply wanting to punish Ukraine, destroy its critical assets and infrastructure, and leave an indelible mark. That will be a strategic, perpetual warning that, look, don't make friends with our enemies. I can summarize it that way. Now, but coming to the more or less, it's another kind of show of force. In showing the president around all of this military arsenal and all of that. I see it as force, as a show of force, but knowing again Russia for their prowess in psychological operations and propaganda, I can also see it as a deliberate final show of force before they will back down. If you put that side by side with the kind of explanation Putin is now kind of resorting to historical sentiments with Ukraine. Of course, we know the original Slavic nation that Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Of course, he should have remembered all of that when he went all the way, to execute a war of aggression against such a neighbor. But you can see, you see, he's trying to match this strategic outing of President Zelensky. President Zelensky in his visit also went back and took the Americans back to some historical sentiments that are very important to them. He likened, and of course other people too have likened his visit to that of Winston Churchill shortly after the Japanese attack of Pearl Harbor, 7th of December 1941. Okay, so he went that way too. Then President Zelensky also likened this final push to the Saratoga battles. That was a turning point in the American Revolutionary War, particularly in 1777, which became a turning point in the entire war itself. So you could see what Putin is doing is like taking each part of what Zelensky has gone to achieve by going to the US and trying to match it, strategy for strategy, psychological for psychological, propaganda for propaganda. That's what I see, and we had his own chief, the chief of what's like I want to claim of chief of defense staff. They've had to boost recruitment, for example. But you can see all of that is like trying to end on a high note. That's what I read. That's just one possibility. It could well be also to send a message to say, look, whatever you do, we are not backing out. In fact, if anything at all, we are reinforcing the operation and we are going all out. And so we are deploying more troops and we are showing that there's still so much in our arsenal we have not deployed yet. So there are many, consequences and interpretations of what is doing so far. Yeah.
Now, let me bring you to the issue of the strategy now and take President Zelensky on our screen. We have visuals of his address to the U.S. Congress there, and then, of course, before that, he met with the U.S. President Biden. I mean, the idea that he would, as leader of the country, leave his country in the middle of war and leave, not just his country, leave Europe, leave the continent and cross the seas all the way to the United States for this visit is a big risk. It was a big gamble. Do you think it was worth it with what he got in terms of that one Patriot missile defense system and the $1.8 billion in military aid, and then the opportunity to speak to the Russian people, rather the American people, directly in person on their soil?
Yes, thank you very much. I had the comment before I came on board of the last speaker. Yeah, for looking at it purely from a military point of view, every effort in fighting a war is a good effort. I mean, usually in the military circle, we say that even the ordinary factory worker who is perhaps making, maybe in the factory manufacturing blankets and towels and such like things, which troops in the field we use when the war is on, it's part of the war effort. So not to talk more of such a strategic, outstanding step and initiative that he has taken is a major war effort. So anybody who is interpreting it as either an attempt to dodge or, that would be a very poor interpretation, because we know, for me, I can look at it. What are the objectives of this visit in the first place? First, it's a great strategic initiative. It's an outstanding war effort. For me, I see it as also a strategic timing on the part of, Zelensky, knowing that the U.S. change of guard will soon happen. And of course, with the outcome of the U.S. midterm election, the Democrats have the upper hand now. So if there were people who were not being favorable, who were not favorable towards the $45 billion package that is awaiting approval, of course, this opportunity for him, and you saw the way it was received, both by the president and then when he addressed the combined house, you saw the love that was demonstrated. And I've seen some of the comments of some of the legislators who were not supporting, particularly the $45 billion package, and they are beginning to change their mind because they were impressed. It's a show of outstanding leadership and courage, not only by him, Zelensky, the president, even his own people. And of course, you see the way they have identified with America and the way he has brought it out. In fact, one of the objectives of this visit is to show his people and the world that America is a reliable ally. You know, unlike what some of the propaganda that was coming from the Russian end is to say, oh, don't worry, America will soon abandon you the same way they abandoned Afghanistan and such like. So he has used this visit, you know, to debunk such ideologies. And on the other hand, I mean, contrary-wise, he has actually shown America is reliable and all of that. That's one of it. Of course, secondly, you find that when you watch the little gist he had with President Biden before addressing the House, you find that you could see the kind of interaction where President Biden too was making the point that Russia has failed in trying to break NATO, in trying to prove them to be an unreliable ally and all of that. So on both ends, I think it's all good. And I can see a lot of takeaway here. Because apart from the 1.8 billion package, which included, of course, this security aspect of it, there are three aspects really of gain here. There is the financial, there is the humanitarian, and there is also the security. So on the financial, you can see there's another $314 million of humanitarian package. Then there is the $45 billion that is the huge that is yet to be approved. I mean, we can be so sure that that bill is going to get a better hearing. In fact, if not an expedited approval than we could ever have imagined. So there's so much gain, there's so much takeaway. I mean, the way I see, that coming out of this visit.
General, you are a commander. You were a commander of troops. So this final question I have to ask before we wind up, and which is that we've talked about what both sides are doing in terms of, as you put it, psychology, in terms of strategy and so on. But on the battlefield right now, there seems to be, apart from the strikes, the air strikes, the missile strikes, there seems to be fairly little gain on either side. And we are told that this is essentially because of the weather. Now, post the weather, and that takes us into the new year. Do you think that this window, given what we are seeing, is simply a lull to regroup by both sides? Or is there, as you said, an opportunity for one of the two sides to step back and say, okay, can we talk about this? Do you see that?
Very well, very well. Well, like I said earlier, we look at it both sides all the time. Now, it's becoming also clear because, like I said, it's becoming clearer that Putin's strategic aim has not been achieved. If it's anything different from simply punishing the Ukrainians and destroying their energy, their critical infrastructure and assets, it shows, of course, that that gain has not, nothing gained really in substantive terms. Now, but the other way is that following that conclusion is the fact that the one good thing that will help the Ukrainians is how to protect those assets and infrastructure. And that's why the Patriot missile system that has been given to them is going to help a whole lot about that, because it's one of the most effective anti-missile system, one of the most effective counter-battery, platforms. I think the only other one that compares very well with it is the S-400, the Russian S-400, which just has a longer range. But there are other technical advantages of the Patriot missile. So for the Ukrainians, that's major setback. But you can see that even some of the bombing that they are doing of the Russian positions within the Donbass area, it's still their own land. The smart thing Putin has done is to bring the battle home to them. So all the damages and destructions are happening within the Ukrainian territory, which is, a disadvantage to them. So one major strategic, solution that the Patriot missile introduction will help them is to be able to safeguard and protect them from all the air strikes that are destroying their critical infrastructure and assets. And of course, that then we take out the only perhaps gain that Russia will say it has made. That we're just mere destruction. And because the people's strength and courage and the fantastic leadership they have enjoyed had ensured that the people are not broken, and neither will they, give up their sovereignty, and neither will they be dissuaded to fight. It's a fight of survival, and it's a matter of sovereignty. It's a matter of national pride. So I see that as all gain for the Ukrainians.
Indeed. Thank you so much for your perspective, General Henry Ayola. Compliments of the season. Merry Christmas ahead to you. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Same to you. Thank you so very much for the opportunity.
And when we return, Russia's Natalia Antioch is stripped of the London 2012 gold Olympic medal. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Laddie Williams is here. Morning, Laddie.
Morning.
Let's take a look at some of the business side of all of this. The bill to give foreigners access to forex trading in Russia has passed first reading.
Yeah.
So is that good news for the foreigners?
Well,
it's looking like that.
It's looking like, some good news, because we know how, the forex market was, roiled last time, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and the sanctions, kept rolling in, at that time, financial sanctions. But, we saw the Central Bank of Russia there, put out some capital control measures, some actually extreme measures that helped keep the ruble quite high. And one of that was not allowing foreigners, take most of their foreign exchange, out of the country, and, shutting them out, of the forex market, and, keeping it open for, friendlier nations. So now, time has passed, since and a lot has happened. So they're looking for ways now to actually, get some, more friendly nations in there, and some that are not so friendly, but in a kind of controlled, trading environment, so that, to bolster some liquidity, in the market, because obviously shutting out, foreigners has reduced liquidity in the market. So it's past the first reading. It remains to be seen how far, they go, and how much freedom they give foreigners in the forex market, because right now they actually need liquidity in that market.
They do. And Russian telecom users are expected to see slower data and more dropped calls, longer outages.
Yeah.
This took a long time in coming. One would have expected that this would have happened much sooner.
Exactly, because the time has come. The giants, Nokia and Ericsson, they're supposed to leave, Russia, by this time.
Right.
December, that was the set time, and obviously these two companies account for majority of all the telecom activities that go on in Russia. So them pulling out, so the professionals there, the experts, are already seeing that, okay, once these two pull out of Russia fully, there's going to be slower download and upload speeds. We'll see calls, a lot of call drops, and longer times for call connections, because these two companies are the powerhouses right now for telecom operations in Russia. So obviously we've seen how Russia has tried to get their own companies to handle some sensitive activities in Russia, but this is actually going to take time, because these two have been running the market for years. So it's obviously going to impact that telecom space, but we're watching that space. Obviously there's going to be a lot of impact going forward once they leave December.
How are the markets looking? Obviously this Santa rally is not happening.
It's not happening, but we're seeing some glimmer of hope. Yesterday in the U.S., we saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the NASDAQ, and the S&P 500, closing the green. Was unexpected, but we've been seeing some good earnings, earning results, helping to, push those markets up. And we got some positive data. We see the consumers are not doing so bad. you know, in the U.S. And, you know, most of the companies, too, are not doing so bad with the earnings we're seeing, because with all the tightening we've seen, you know, this year we can just target the year of tightening cycle for 2022.
Right.
So we're seeing some companies still resilient, you know, even with all of that. How many basis points, you know, most central bankers have raised rates, you know, this year. So some companies are still holding up well in the U.S., and we're seeing that put some confidence with investors there. We're seeing them, you know, get some skin into that market, and we're seeing the market going up, but there's still some cautious, you know, optimism.
The key point being cautious.
You have to be cautious, you know, in this market, because some are still calling it the bear market rallies. You know, they come, but they get to the resistance level and they fall down back. So some analysts are still expecting, you know, more downside, and obviously, you know, speculation into 2023 is more downside is expected, because inflation is still there, the war is still on, but some investors are still optimistic.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks, Laddie. We'll see you at 10,
Exactly.
And then, of course, later on in the day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's take a look quickly at some of the sports out of this conflict as well. Cardiff Metropolitan University has offered its facilities to Ukrainian athletes to help them in their preparations for the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. This partnership stems from the friendship between Cardiff Met performance coach Gareth Walton and Ukrainian speed coach Sergei Basenko, and is supported by a fellowship and scholarship fund from the university worth almost $500,000. It is also part of a wider cooperation agreement between British and Ukrainian institutions, with 71 partnerships formed to date. And Russian Sports Minister Oleg Matysyn has admitted that sports is a crucial element that contributes to Russia's national security. Mr. Matysyn said any additional development of global sports is impossible without Russia's participation. He added that the sports community had become Russia-phobic, and Russia had been forced to create partnerships with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS group. And finally, on the program, Russia's Natalia Antyuk has been stripped of the 400 meters hurdles gold from the London 2012 Olympic Games on the basis of historical data from a Moscow testing laboratory. The 41-year-old Antyuk is already serving a 4-year ban after being named in a World Anti-Doping Agency investigation into cheating by Russia. The American Lashinda Dimas will be promoted to gold in her place. All 3 gold medals won on the track by Russian athletes at the London 2012 Olympic Games have now been reversed on doping grounds. Maria Savinova and Yulia Zaripova, the initial winners of the 800 meters and 3,000 meters steeplechase gold, have been disqualified. Ivan Ukov's high jump title and Tatiana Lysenko's hammer victory in the field have also been wiped from the record books. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Laddie Akri. You have yourselves a blessed day ahead. Good morning.